Why do people do that? It's just like
Get a little extra
floor
square
space.
footage.
Yeah. They're a problem.
I don't know, what was the old garrison-style houses back in the medieval...
Revolutionary War?
Or even earlier. Was it just to have room to get out over the sidewalks and dump your
Chamber
bed?
pot. Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. I'm joined by Associate Editor Matt Milham.
What up?
Love when you do that. And Rob Watsack, Digital Brand Manager.
Howdy.
Please email us your questions at fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast.
Wow.
What do you think?
Yeah, I like that. Because I was just talking to Patrick about how
The sameness with radio delivery.
I can't tell if that intro is pre-recorded or not.
We do it special every time, I can say to our listeners.
Just for you.
We could reuse it every time, but no, you're worth more than that. So we talked a little bit last time about your workbench, which was winding up.
Yeah.
This has been a long project, am I wrong?
It's been going on a little longer than it's cold out there.
Are you
in
going
the
to
garage.
admit how much longer it's been going on than you expected?
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know. When did I start it? More than a month ago.
Not as long as Patrick's closet project.
Yeah, that's true.
That's done.
Yeah.
Part of it.
Yeah. No, I mean, in terms of like actual time, it probably was only about 8 to 10 hours of like cutting and assembly for the main bench.
How about the surfacing of the stock?
Yeah,
Ooh, that's a nice
I think
picture.
that's probably included in that. I mean, it took maybe less than an hour to surface everything. I don't have a jointer, so everything just ran through a little planer a couple
You put
times.
the boards on edge and through the planer?
I did.
Yeah, that's the way to go.
Yeah. At first, I ran them through on the flat individually through the planer, and then glued it up half and half for the top, and ran those through on edge.
And the most recent update has been your storage boxes underneath. Right?
Yeah, so I decided to put some, like a little cabinet underneath and some storage just so I could have some drawers. Did some box joints, went pretty quick, about an hour to cut all the joints for the 7 boxes. So
I love
not
this
too
thing.
bad.
It's kind of mid-century modern looking with all those clean lines on there. In fact, I almost expect to see that in an issue of Dwell in like someone's kitchen island.
That's a nice thing. And what I love most about it is you're using of dimensional lumber to build it, which I think is super cool instead of like buying like $1,000 worth of maple.
Yeah, I think the casters were almost as much as all of the lumber for the thing.
Where'd you get the casters?
I got those at Rockler. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they were like $80 or something like that, $90.
How hard is it to move?
It's really easy to move on flat surfaces, but yeah, on my driveway, when I tried to move it out into the light to get this picture, my driveway sloped, so my only option was basically to push it all the way to the edge of the grass, which then took a lot of grunting to get it back up.
Dude, that's heavy.
Yeah, it's probably. I mean, there's stuff in those drawers. I should have taken that stuff out, but it's probably close to 300 pounds now.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So Matt built this thing with some little outriggers for holding his table saw to double as an outfeed table for the table saw. That's
Yeah,
right?
yep.
And did you build those at a fixed height or is it an adjustable?
It's at a fixed height, so it really only works with that table the way that it's set up, or that saw the way that it's set up.
Yep.
But I
It'd be
can always.
easy to change that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can just add onto the top of it. I can't really lower it unless I wanted to. I could cut into those 2x.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's cheap. So.
Yeah, we on our Instagram feed, we've been sharing every now and then. There's some guys doing some great stuff with job site workstations and tables out there. And anybody listening, if you're on Instagram, go ahead and tag any of that stuff with Fine Homebuilding or Keep Craft Alive hashtags, because we love to share it when you're doing good ideas.
You get the best ideas from other craftspeople, tradespeople for your own storage, and even if it doesn't work exactly for you, what you see is you can always adapt it to make it work for your individual stuff and work style.
Yeah. Well, back in the day before social media and such, we got a lot of snail mail with tips in the magazine, and that's where most of the tips had come from over the years. But as the media has evolved, really Instagram is actually probably one of the best sources for us to go look for
And
ideas.
it's way easier than writing a letter.
Yeah.
You take a picture and put it up there, and
So show us your work. Tag us.
you have been busy making viral videos.
Yeah. I've mentioned a couple of times on the podcast the bike plow. It's basically
Last time I looked, we were up to almost 500,000 views this morning. Did you know that?
Yeah, I did. So basically, using my experience producing videos for Fine Homebuilding, I had my daughter shoot with my iPhone a bunch of nice clips of me clearing the driveway in the latest snowstorm, and I posted it just on my.
The interesting part about clearing your driveway was the vehicle with which you were plowing.
Well, yeah. So I built this vehicle that I think I've mentioned before. That
It's a tricycle.
it's what it is. If you start from if you go from front to back, the front is a typical little plow you'd have on a garden tractor, like probably from some old Craftsman or John Deere garden tractor, and then that is welded to a modified hand truck with a wider axle on it, and
With pneumatic tires.
and a pair of bicycle handlebars where the handles used to be, and then that is welded to a Mongoose BMX bicycle frame.
That's a little one, right? It's like a little tiny one.
Yeah, it's flipped upside down, and I welded another bike frame on top of that to get the seat to the height I needed it. And then hanging off the back is a real Frankenstein-looking assemblage of angle iron cobbled together to hang two suitcase weights, like 80-pound tractor.
These are the things that go on the front end of a tractor to keep it from lifting up.
Yeah, so I need those for traction. But all it's got on the rear wheel is a BMX, 20-inch knobby tire, and those weights give it enough traction. I was able to push 6 inches of snow with it, and so I posted the little video on my personal Facebook account and shared it to a couple of pages, and that was about a day and a half ago. And by the time everyone hears this, it'll be a couple of weeks.
Well, we're going to put it back on our podcast page so folks can take a look at it, and I think by that point you'll be up to like 10 million views.
People seem to like it.
You'll be retired, and you'll have to phone into the podcast from then on.
I wish I had a couple more of them built because people are asking to buy them.
I would sell them before they realize that you have to actually pedal the snow. Oh, that was good stuff. I learned something interesting that I didn't know you could do. So in my Facebook feed, I had one of my high school classmates talking about the replacement of their sewer line. And this is, not fluffy kitten videos, but this is real life. And these folks had roots intruding into their clay pipe sewer line. And this happened a couple times, and it got to the point where the line was compromised. It had cracked. So what you can do now is this technology called Trenchless pipe bursting. And what you do is you feed a steel cable down the old pipe, and you get this hydraulic puller that drags what looks like a torpedo through the old pipe, dragging a continuous piece of ABS pipe the same diameter behind it. And there's no digging, and I'm sure it was way less expensive than having an excavator out, come dig up the pipe, and having a plumber come and replace it. And this was done by their New Jersey Roto-Rooter dealer. And I thought it was pretty cool. So I had to go looking on the web for videos to see how this technology works. And what you do is you cut a hole in the basement, in line with the pipe somewhere, so you can drop this thing in there, and then you dig a similar size hole on the end of the line where you're pulling to, and you just drag this thing through the ground, which I thought was so cool.
I've heard of people doing that with water lines before. They have some sort of apparatus to shoot a water line.
So these things grow in size up to, they can pull huge gas lines like 8, 10, 12 inches through the ground using this technology. And obviously the minimal site disturbance is huge, right? Especially if you have mature landscaping. So I thought I would share that with listeners, that this is now available and is often less expensive than doing this kind of work the conventional way.
I've seen where they have used like a soft pipe that they install in the old one, and then they kind of inflate it, and then they use like an epoxy resin or whatever and harden that inside. This is completely different from that.
Completely
right?
different from that. And the one problem with that technology is the pipe has to be largely intact, whereas this one, you just need the smallest passage to get that cable through initially.
Yeah.
And my guess is they use like a line clearing snake to feed that first cable through, and a camera. And I was actually watching some YouTube footage of a little camera in front of the pipe being pulled through, and it's pretty cool. It's like just busts its way through, and there's a new pipe behind it.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's exciting to hear about stuff like this in that, you know, for years, the home building industry, because it's this fragmented thing made up of mostly like guys with a pickup truck somewhere, you know, not part of some integrated larger, you know, industry. There's technology that we can be tapping into that just never trickles down to the residential
And
world.
oftentimes it doesn't make financial sense, right? You just can't afford to buy this machinery. But this looked like a pretty simple hydraulic power head. It was probably the size of a milk crate.
Wow.
And, you know, this means the hole you need is only like 3x3, it looked like, to put this thing in there. But it's, my guess is that we're going to see more of it.
Makes
Because
sense.
our infrastructure, especially on the East Coast and New England, and the Midwest is old, and this kind of stuff fails.
Yeah.
And it's a big problem, right, Rob?
Yeah, I know that from experience. We cleared my clay pipes, and luckily the guy seemed to think they were intact when we had the similar problem to these people. So, but yeah, I was dreading the call that he was going to say that we'd have to tear up the whole front. Luckily, my front lawn's not that big, but
It's just a hassle, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
you
just a
guys
mess.
have nice landscaping, and it's just a hassle.
yeah, I mean, so you got to think that even if it was a little more expensive, when you start factoring in the fact of that you have to restore your landscape to its prior state, that's a big deal, and just the time involved.
Yeah, and it's a mess living with it.
Yeah.
So talking about that has allowed me to skip over my closet progress.
Thanks.
Which is what? Non-existent?
We're in the planning stage. So our deal is, and my wife and I we're going to be married 20 years in July. And what we've learned over the years is that we do way better when we like live with stuff and decide how to make it better while we're experiencing it. So I think we're going to actually change the floor plan from what we anticipated in our bedroom than what we were going to do. So now we're trying to work that out.
You know, that's actually a valuable perspective, because it's hard for a lot of people to visualize a space accurately without actually being in that space, right? So, and then especially even once you have walls framed, a space doesn't look like what
And
it's
I
going to
think
look
there's
like till you
something
have
about
drywall.
experiencing it too. I mean, like even in the best, renderings with 3D and what do they call that? The goggles you put on.
VR, yeah.
The VR. It's like you're not really in the space.
Right.
No. And you can make something look really great in a rendering or in a drawing, but it doesn't represent the actual texture and the light and all that other stuff. And I read this book years ago before I was even anywhere involved in home building, but I was interested in building a house for myself someday. And it was this house I found, I think it was from the 60s or 70s, called Your Engineered Home.
Sounds very comfy.
Yeah. I think that's the title. I'll find it and put a link in the podcast notes. But basically what it was this guy who was like a mechanical engineer, and he was just convinced that everything we'd ever done in how we build houses is just wrong, because people were just basing it on tradition and habit and not actual technology. And I mean, he had some of that right, but he basically did this investigation into what he thought would be a better house. And this was before double pane windows. So like he was dealing with things like condensation and trying to figure out how to get around like the normal house problems. And what he came up with was basically a house that is up on stilts, that has windows that are slightly pitched with these little cute little gutters built into the sashes so that the condensation would pool there and then evaporate. and there were all kinds of other things, but there's a lot of things that he came up with that were really, I thought, great. Like one was just that if you have the ability to basically buy a piece of land and actually spend some time on that land before you even think about designing a house on it, because you get to know the way the sun passes over the property and where you want your bedroom to be based on whether you want the sun coming in your window in the morning or just sort of the natural flow of getting across the property. And I think there's a lot of value, but not everybody can have the luxury of doing that, I don't think. But
no, some people just has to say, that's the street, that's the front of the house.
Yeah. But yeah, that was one of my biggest takeaways from that book, was just the idea of choosing a site based on characteristics that you experienced over time, rather than just sort of rushing into it and like doing like a lot of people typically do, is buy a wooded lot, clear a rectangular space in the middle of it, and somehow fit a house in there.
Yeah, with little regard to, does it make sense?
Yeah.
So when we did the second story addition on our last house, we would actually go up into unfinished space and hang out there and just, see and experience it and try and make it better. And I think it worked. So much to my chagrin, this is going to take longer than I thought. But we heard from Jonathan from Silver Spring, Maryland. And he writes, I did a minor bathroom makeover a couple years ago. Upon removing the old vanity, I discovered a large hole in the wall that was probably used to access the bath and shower plumbing for a repair. I covered the hole with an access panel. The hole was still too large, so I added another smaller access panel. Can you guys explain to me how that works? So he covered it with a panel, but it was too small, so he covered it with a smaller panel? Or was it a second panel?
He's kind of like building like a tiled wall out of access panels.
Okay. I recently felt a draft through the gaps around the panel, so I covered the hole with plastic. It looks terrible. And here we have a photo of that, Jeff. I don't know what he's talking about. I think it looks great. So it's drywall with a layer of saran wrap on top of it.
It looks like one of those window kits you buy for $5 at like the big box
What
stores,
I love
right?
is I'm sure he's right that this was a plumber who did this. Didn't even cut a square hole. Just like, it's just a hole.
Yeah. Well, it may have just been the previous homeowner.
Somebody.
Didn't have a hole saw.
I don't shy away from patching drywall, but I'm afraid that I will need to fix the plumbing issue as soon as the joint compound dries. How can I seal up the hole without losing any easy access to the plumbing? Thanks again for all you do. You're developing a loyal following. Thanks, Jonathan. This is an easy problem to fix, right?
Yeah, I had a similar situation in the little schoolhouse I lived in for a couple of years, and it had the tiniest bathroom with the tiniest little clawfoot tub I've ever seen.
How big? I've seen them as little as 4 foot.
Yeah, it was probably about that. Like, you could not sit in it comfortably.
It's meant to stand in.
Yeah, it's meant to stand in. And I mean, it was like basically a little shower.
I love those things.
Yeah, and it was great. I mean, it was a nice little tub.
Yeah.
But there was no way to access the plumbing really from inside the bathroom.
Right.
And so there was a similar access hatch on it, basically in the kitchen, and you would have to open it through there and to get in there to be able to.
It was like in the cabinet or something?
No, it was just in a wall in front of the stove.
And what was it, plywood panel, or was it actually something more finished?
It was a beadboard panel, I believe. Yeah.
With casing around it or no?
Yeah, it had a little frame. It was basically like a frame and panel with a regular, probably 3/4 inch frame, and then like beadboard panel inside.
Hinges or no?
No, it was just screwed on.
Yeah. So, what's your experience with this?
So the beadboard panel seems to be a common thing for covering up plumbing chases, because my house was built before plumbing. So when they put the bathroom in the upstairs, they had this bedroom downstairs that they just didn't. They didn't bother to cover up the radiator pipes. Those are just sort of sticking willy-nilly out of the floor.
Because they're radiating.
Yeah. In fact, that room didn't even have a radiator. That was the only heat they got.
Yeah, that was the radiation, was the pipes.
But they, halfway across one of the main walls in this room, they just sort of took beadboard and took like the screws with those little fancy washers, those
finishing
sheet
washers.
metal, those sheet metal finishing washers, and they just sort of screwed this box together, just like some cleats on the wall. Yeah,
that's not anything like this.
No, it isn't. No.
In my case, though, there was beadboard wainscot around the entire building, so it blended in pretty nice. Yep. Yeah.
So either the plywood panel with or without casing is what people have done forever. I say patch the drywall, and if you need to fix the plumbing, make a new hole.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it this way. I mean, like I think I've mentioned before, it's like I learned a long time ago too. if you're going to patch a hole in drywall, a big hole is as easy to patch as a small hole, and it only takes a couple of minutes to
make
do
a big
it,
hole.
to make a big hole. And the amount of work that it takes to trim out a hole that you might never actually have to access again is it really? You're probably not saving any effort there. But also, maybe focus a little more effort on putting some maybe rigid foam behind the pipes if we think it's going to be. Is this a freezing location? Did he say? I can't remember.
He's in Maryland. He doesn't care.
Yeah. Okay. So
it might get down to freezing a few times a year, right?
Yeah. I mean,
There's going to be angry letters from all over Maryland saying I'm completely clueless about the climate in Maryland.
Yeah. I've been getting that a lot lately. haven't been reading far enough.
So
down
this is
the notes.
Silver Spring, Maryland, which is close to DC, right? So it's pretty temperate.
Yeah, that's fine. But I mean, it would be nice to have access to plumbing, like if you had a utility space. But if it's in a finished space, I would actually just.
Alternatively, you can buy a ready-made access panel, and I've had great success with the Oatey ones. Oatey, and they are purveyors of all kinds of weird plumbing things. Did you like that alliteration? Mm-hmm. And they make them as big as 14 by 29, and as little as 6 by 6 or 6 by 9. And the biggest one, the 14 by 29, sells for $30 on Amazon. And there's a photo of it we'll have that on the podcast website too, but you just glue this thing in place. It's got a little flange that hides the ragged edge of the drywall, and it's flush. You can paint it. You could wallpaper it. I don't think you could tile it, but it's so pretty I wouldn't bother.
It's going to be hidden anyway, right?
Yeah.
Well, that seems like the easiest solution right there.
Yeah. I've used these to hide high water alarms on built into a wall for a septic system. So rather than have this wacky little box stuck on the side of the wall, make a recess, put this cover on it, and get on with your life.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, that was easy. I wouldn't overlook patching the drywall, though, because that's almost free. How about our next question is from Scott in New Jersey. Guys, I love the podcast and listen religiously. I'm currently renovating and adding to a 1950s split level in climate zone 4, less than half a mile from zone 5. He has a number of questions here, so we're going to take them one at a time. In podcast 148, you talked about using aero barrier to seal a house post-drywall. I completely get it post-sheathing, but post-drywall? Aren't there concerns about moisture collecting behind the drywall? I understand that vapor will travel through the sheathing and vapor-permeable WRB drying to the outside, but will be at high enough rate to prevent mold growth on the inside, especially with hot and humid summers and a heavy cooling load. I do plan on spraying down the stud bays with boric hair. So, aero barrier, we're talking about, I think it was probably 2 gallons of material total that they sprayed through this entire house. So we're not really talking about a lot of water. So I don't think you have to worry about that. And stuff, assuming you don't have vinyl wall covering on the inside or a plastic vapor retarder, it's going to dry to the inside too through the paint, because paint does have some permeability.
Yeah.
Well, I was kind of reading his question as if he starts sealing up the drywall, is it better for him to just let it breathe? But basically, no.
No,
Yeah.
never.
I mean, there is the airtight drywall approach, and I mean, this is essentially just doing that without having to go through and detail that as assiduously or as I don't know, be as crazy about going around with smoke pencils and guns.
Yeah, and it seals the
guns.
holes where there are holes.
Yeah.
It doesn't seal holes where there are not holes, which is what other air sealing methods often do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's I can understand when you live in an old house like most of us do, that you're worried that doing a partial fix is going to cause a bigger problem. Like if you've got leaky windows and they're building up moisture on the inside of the house, inside of the wall cavities, then sealing up the drywall on the inside is going to possibly reduce the drying potential of those walls.
Sure.
And that definitely is a concern, but I mean, which is why, there's sort of a certain order you should deal with certain things. Like if you're going to improve your insulation or your air sealing in your house, you should make sure that you have good overhangs or flashing details on the outside.
Do you remember the order of operations that most building scientists subscribe to? So the first thing is control bulk water. right? You don't want water getting into your walls or your roof. And then you can start worrying about these other things, and I don't remember what them are in order, but then you need to establish an air barrier, and then you have to worry about insulating, right? So all these things have to work together.
Yeah, and so if you're not dealing with exterior details on a remodel on an old house like this, I don't know, what would you say? How would you assess whether the walls are staying dry enough, like that your flashing isn't pouring water in?
I'd make a hole, and I'd make a hole under a window. And you can either make a tiny hole that you can put an inspection camera, a borescope in it, or you can make a bigger hole that you can actually look inside.
I feel like I read something somewhere about people using infrared cameras to see if there's moisture in the walls.
That's true.
Yeah.
Because a IR camera will show water infiltration because those surfaces will be colder than the surrounding dry surfaces.
Yeah, just the action of evaporation of that water evaporating
makes it
a
cool
little
down.
bit makes it cool down a little bit. So, and those things can get a very small temperature differential. It'll show up.
That's a good suggestion.
Yeah, and now with the small camera attachments for smartphones, you can get into an IR. It used to be thousands of dollars to get access to an IR camera. Now you can get it for even as low as $100, I think. Right?
There's one being advertised on the Fine Homebuilding website presently.
Yeah, I think it's in my backpack currently, that one.
What is that now, Matt? Tell us
What
about
is it?
that.
I think it's
FLIR?
like $3.99. Yeah, it's a FLIR camera, forward-looking infrared.
And it works with your smartphone, right?
It works with smartphone, iPhone, or this one's an iPhone model. I think they may have it may be a slightly different connection for like an Android.
It would be.
Yeah, but it just clips on the phone. You download a little app, and it shows up just like a regular, like Predator Vision.
So the various price points of IR cameras, what you're paying for is its discretion at determining differences in temperature, right? So the most expensive cameras can determine the smallest difference. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So this one is pretty good.
Yeah, and this one it operates sort of in two modes. You can either just look at the infrared image, but you can also look at it sort of overlaid with like an actual image. So you get a photo, so you get a little more detail, and you can tell where the edges of windows are and things like that. So,
And corners, and it's useful that way because an IR image looks pretty flat.
Yeah. So it adds a little depth to the image.
So it kind of looks like one of the heat maps you use for lighting when you're doing your camera work, like on a DSLR camera, like an color overlay over the image.
Yeah, and you can change the color, like whatever the color profile is. So it's pretty neat.
What do you only use the automatic settings on your camera when you go on photo shoots, Patrick?
He's not looking at the histogram or anything.
Histogram.
Yeah,
it doesn't tell you anything.
No.
Okay, so he's trying to make a tight house that's well ventilated, and we've been exploring the application of an ERV along with a forced air conditioning and heating system. Our attention is a VRF. I don't know what that means.
It's a variable
refrigerant flow, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I did know what that is.
Yeah.
A variant refrigerant flow condensing unit, and are exploring pricing on going ductless or semi-ductless. So most refrigeration cycles, so like either are running or not. They're on or off, and these VRF ones can actually run at different speeds to better match the loads. It's the newest technology in HVAC equipment. To that end, we've been exploring the idea of working against the stack effect and having the stale ale being pulled from the basement, conditioned, and released in an upper floor hallway. And speaking to a number of HVAC contractors, they don't seem to understand the idea of drawing from the sink of cooler, more humid basement air in the basement to either temper or be tempered by the upstairs air. We don't plan on having any closed doorways from top to bottom. Should we be exploring a ducted dehumidifier, understanding that the VRF condenser can perform the same function? Do you think this guy's an engineer?
Probably.
Sounds like it.
Scott, are you an engineer? So what about the idea of pulling air from your basement to help it cool the upstairs and the heating part of the season? And I don't know if you'd reverse the airflow in the cooling climate or in the heating climate.
I don't know.
It sounds complicated to me, and especially since he's in one of these multi-split houses where you've got half flights of stairs going back and forth and back and forth. You've got a lot of levels where you're dealing with here, and also I think it's dangerous to rely, especially in like a mid-Atlantic climate, on your air conditioning system to dehumidification.
Especially in a low-load house, right?
Yeah.
And why?
because it's just not going to be running often enough.
That's the problem, right? It's just not dry. It's not, the airflow going over the coil is not often enough to actually dehumidify.
Yeah, it seems crazy to think that you would have this amazing system that's expensive because it runs more efficiently and can actually do those functions, and it seems redundant to actually add a power-hungry dehumidification system to a house that already can do dehumidification.
So one of the big pluses of the VRF systems is that they can better manage humidity because you can actually slow down the flow to get good latent cooling. Latent and sensible cooling are referred to the two ways people are comfortable. Sensible cooling is like actually lowering the temperature. Latent cooling is lowering the humidity. So you need to do both those to be comfortable in the summer, especially in, where is he?
New Jersey.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't been following the advancements in that equipment that closely, but I imagine that we're going to get to the point where that's just a natural feature of an HVAC system because people are going to balk at having a separate dehumidification system, but I don't know.
I think people are just going to be cheap for another 20 years, and then this will become mainstream.
Yeah.
But you can also kind of have like an in-between, which is a two-stage heating and cooling system where instead of all or nothing, you have, half or all or nothing.
All right.
Mostly I'm confused by his description of this as the stack effect. This seems more like just stratification that he's talking about.
Yeah, that's probably a better description of what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Just balancing out the stratification by pulling from the varying conditions.
Temperature layers, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll let you guys weigh in on, but what I'm going to say is get a good HVAC contractor who's really going to do an aggressive manual J calculation and not do the seat of the pants calculations that most of them do. Like look at the loads, match the system to the real loads, and trust their judgment with regard to where to take the return air, the air going back to the air handler. And I don't know, it seems needlessly complex to be trying to move where that comes from seasonally to me.
Yeah, I mean, it almost reminds me of, and maybe it's not quite the same, but like the idea that people think that a ceiling fan can help you in the heating season because you're actually causing more circulation of air than you need, so you're causing convection currents that actually make you feel cooler than if the air was just stationary. And so, So
you're saying that while the fan might be mixing the air effectively, its breeze is going to make you feel cold regardless.
Yes. And the fact that this house is, again, complicated levels, and he's using a very efficient system. The system's probably efficient enough that if he just zones it properly, he doesn't have to try to do any fancy stuff by trying to mix and move the air around.
Yeah, and part of a good HVAC contract will be to commission the system, and that means you're going to check the airflows on all the registers, and you're going to make sure that you're having the appropriate amount of mixing and that the return air is coming from places that make sense.
And he's going to have some of these vents and returns in the basement, I assume. Then?
I would assume, and I would tell him that's a good idea.
Yeah.
And then you're mixing anyway.
Right.
Yeah, so really the key is getting the right person to help you design the system, and that might not be the actual HVAC contractor. That might be
an engineer,
or some other energy efficiency consultant.
So he's got one more question, or two. No, three. Our house will have cantilevered floors over a 2-car internal garage. So this split level has got floors beyond the foundation footprint going up, is my presumption, and he wants to know the best way to insulate those cantilevered areas and above the garage. He says closed cell spray foam would be the best option, I'm sure. It is also the priciest. Are there other options that could perform on bar or better than spray foam in these areas? So, what do you say?
I would say no.
I would say no.
No. I mean, it's certainly the easiest way to go.
You can cut and cobble, right, which is fitting rigid fiberglass and sealing it with can spray foam, but that's extremely labor-intensive. And unless you're going to do it yourself, it's going to cost more than someone coming in with a spray foam rig, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
But now in one of the recent design articles in the magazine, that one about that house in Martha's Vineyard, I think, it was a little stilt house on piers. They came up with a really wacky system because they didn't have access to the bottom of doing a layer of rigid foam, well, first plywood, then rigid foam, then some sort of loose or bad insulation underneath the floor system. But if you've got a cantilever like this and you're willing to maybe deal with some interesting trim details because of the additional thickness that you might create, it might not be a bad idea to pull off that entire soffit or whatever you want to call it underneath there, put some kind of rock wool or other bad insulation in there, and then just cover the entire thing with a sheet of rigid foam taped, and just treat it like a wall, and then just you might have to do some trim detail to cover that extra depth that you add if you go with rigid foam. Otherwise, but again, he's in New Jersey, so maybe plywood just air sealed is enough.
The cantilevered qualities of split levels and garrison colonials, where the first floor overhangs the foundation, is one of those areas that weatherization and building science people will tell you is a constant problem, because you have that underside that's exposed to the air, and then that air travels all through the floor system unless you block off the ends of the joist cavities at the foundation plane.
Yeah, which almost never seems to be the case. They sort of it's the same problem you have in like capes with that weird attic space where they don't really treat it as inside or outside and don't separate the air spaces properly.
These are especially problematic because every joist bay virtually is open to the outside. So, I mean, and then that air gets in the floor system and can travel all through the house in the holes for pipes and wires, ducts. So, what do you say? Don't build a cantilevered floor system.
Don't build a cantilevered floor system.
Why do people do that? It's just like
get a little extra
floor
square
space.
footage.
Yeah. They're a problem.
I don't know. What was the old garrison style houses back in the medieval
Revolutionary War?
Or even earlier? What was it, just to have room to get out over the sidewalks and dump your
chamber
pot into the gutters, right?
Yeah. Wouldn't splash back on your house.
And it was to create like a porch, right? It's like instead of building a porch, you just make the floor longer.
I don't know. I mean, you see a lot of those old half-timbered houses with this sort of like garrison overhang detail, and they don't have porches up there. It's just the house, just some heavy timbers hanging out over the sidewalk or street.
There's got to be a good reason. You think it's the chamber pot exclusively?
I don't know.
I don't think so.
That's probably not, but...
But do you know why they do that?
I have
the historical?
No idea. No.
We'll dig into that because I'm curious.
Yeah.
You would almost think that they had the presence of mind to think, well, we're protecting the lower level of the house from
and that
the
might
weather.
be it.
But if you look at it that way, usually there's no roof overhangs on houses like that, so they weren't trying to protect the upper levels.
Maybe that didn't matter as much to them.
Yeah, the kids slept upstairs. We don't care about that.
Water intrusion, they'll be fine. So this is his last question. We will be expanding a bit with the slab on grade and are also concerned about room comfort. No one we've spoken to has heard of putting EPS under the slab. That's rigid insulation. Are we crazy for fighting for it? Would the same hold true in a full basement, putting 2.5 inches of EPS sub-slab? Thank you guys so much for providing me some weekly education and entertainment. You must be talking about another show. So 2.5 inches of EPS. He's in zone 4.
He probably doesn't need that much.
Wrong answer.
No? Does he?
Since 2012, the code has required R10 under slabs.
Even that far south.
His contractors are very uninformed.
Yeah.
And in the 2015 code, Zone 5, where he said he's very close to, actually requires R15. So it would probably be a good idea to put R15, and it's not going to cost that much more money. And your house is going to be way more comfortable. You're going to raise the temperature of that basement slab to prevent condensation, and everyone's going to be happier.
Yeah.
That's weird that they haven't heard of it.
That's unbelievable, right?
Yeah. Well, that goes back to, we didn't cover it at the beginning of the show, but I had thrown some pictures in the slideshow about this Victorian house that was getting an addition in my neighborhood. And, I was watching them frame it, and they slapped some house wrap on there, and they installed the windows. And I wasn't there to see how they detailed those windows, unfortunately. But it just kind of looks like they stuck everything to the side of the house. I mean, you can even see there's where they just went right over the roof shingles where they tied into an existing roof. And it just makes me wonder, what percentage of remodelers out there do you think really understand what's necessary or what's required, or even what's to code, but even just what's basic common sense as far as
very few
these sort of details.
And I've met no industry where people can be so sure of themselves but yet have no clue about what they're talking about. Am I wrong?
Yeah,
probably not.
I mean, and the thing is, it's not saying that people don't care. It's just that there's so many of these details that we've as we've gotten introduced building science into the construction industry over the past number of decades, we just understand more about what happens inside a house.
But the training is not kept up.
No.
Like the research has gone on, but the guys are still building houses the way they did in the 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah, a good friend of mine was actually insulating the inside of his. It's actually a barn workshop, but I mean it's a finished heated space. And he got some cheap fiberglass bats, and he was stapling up all the plastic vapor barrier over the inside of the fiberglass bats. And if you're up in Canada, that's I think still considered a good idea. But that's what he learned a couple of decades ago. That's what everybody was telling people to do.
Yeah.
And it's I was like, you can leave that off of there.
And it would be better too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that was a good question, though. All of them. This comes from Patrick from upstate New York. Hey, folks, please excuse another question about moisture control or lack of. That has been a theme lately, hasn't it?
Yeah, we seem to get obviously it's something that a lot of people have concerns about. I mean, it's even me in my own house, as much as I know, I'm constantly wondering if I'm doing the right thing.
And I kind of think that discussion of a question actually makes people have more questions sometimes too, and especially with regard to their own particular situation. Yeah. He has a 20-year-old house in Schenectady County, New York, that has perforated soffits with a continuous ridge vent. The other side of the upper roof and both sides of the lower roof have no mold mildew. The mold mildew is worse near the soffits and lessens closer to the ridge. 2 years ago, the entire roof was replaced. All the sheathing on one side of the roof with the mold and mildew was replaced. We are assuming the problem was blocked airflow from the perforated soffits due to the missed installation of insulation baffles. Alas, the mold and mildew has already returned, and it seems worse. The ventilation of the bathroom was also upgraded 2 years ago with a new blower and insulated ducts emptying through a wall vent on one of the gables. As a newer house, minimal penetrations exist in the ceiling and seams sealed. I recently insulated the attic space access panel using details from the GBA website. Okay, here we go. As an avid listener of the FHB podcast, I have learned that mold and mildew is caused by moist, warm air escaping from the heated space with the moisture condensing on the underside of the cold sheathing, right? So we have warm, moist air in the house, and it's hitting the first cold things it runs into, which is your roof sheathing. Blocked airflow in a ventilated attic likely causes icicle formation, not mold and mildew. The house has no icicles, ice dams, right? Mm-hmm. Based on visible frost on the underside of the sheathing, the source of the moist air is near the soffits along the entire side of the roof with the mold and mildew. I used a diagnostic camera in the attic to explore the area near top plates supporting the trusses. I found extensive mold mildew on the attic side of the perforated soffit, so the source of the moisture is near the soffit. My hunch is that the construction detail was omitted on the wall supporting the side of the roof with mold mildew. The wall sheathing is OSB wrapped with Tyvek. See the attached installation information from DuPont Tyvek for the detail at the top plate and truss interface. Okay.
I don't think this is the detail he has.
No, he's wondering if because this is omitted, is this his problem?
But
what do you think?
So let's do a better job of describing the detail before we. Can you kind of recap that, Patrick?
Let's talk about what it says first.
Okay.
Yeah.
When using Tyvek as an air barrier, this is the detail. So most people don't use Tyvek in this application. They use it as a water resistive barrier. It's meant to shed water, not stop air infiltration.
Right.
You can use it that way. It takes a lot more work. Arguably, it doesn't work at all because you're going to have thousands of staple holes in it. So you don't want to use your weather barrier as your air barrier in almost all instances.
Yeah. But if he does have this, I just noticed one of those magazines is upside down on the wall over there.
Is that messing you up, buddy?
It is
should
now.
Should I fix that before we go on?
But one way he would be able to tell is he'd be able to just go up into his attic, move the insulation out of the way, and
you see
if
this
there's
flap.
Tyvek on the basically the floor or what would be the ceiling, because
it'd be on the top side of the ceiling drywall, right?
Right. So if he doesn't see that, then he probably doesn't have that other detail.
I've never seen a house with this detail ever. Have you seen this ever?
No,
I think this is Tyvek's. Are they an advertiser? I think this is Tyvek's way to say that they can make an air barrier when they really can't.
So, just for the reader's sake, though, can you just describe that?
So what
Yeah.
they do is they take a flap of Tyvek, wrap it around the top of the top plate on the wall, and it gets brought into the building enclosure, and then you drywall over it on the ceiling.
Right. So, well, what they do is they would basically put a strip of this stuff down on top of the first top plate, and then sandwich that layer of Tyvek between the lower top plate and the top plate.
Sounds easy.
Yeah, and then they would tape that flap on the outside to the Tyvek when they installed it on the outside, and they would tape it to the Tyvek that gets put on the
ceiling, which is
before
something
the drywall.
everyone does. Not.
I can't imagine any builder taking the time to plan that detail and actually feel like they can rely on that detail. I mean, it just even if it really works, that's not the point. It's just that it's like there's so many steps that you're doing out of order.
It's wacky.
There.
It's
Yeah.
totally wacky. So
as much as it seems like that might be correct, I mean, it could be, but I mean, it just seems unlikely.
Yeah.
I think he has air leaks.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think so. I mean, I was thinking about my own house when I bought that, and we went through. I took down the molding around all of the walls, like at the top of the walls. It was like a bed molding, at the junction
It's meant to
between the
look
ceiling.
like crown molding.
Yeah, it's like it looks like a tiny little crown molding, and none of the drywall was taped up there.
I've had a house like that
Yeah,
too.
so I went through and taped everything. And I don't believe the house had ice damming problems, but I could tell when I went back up later on and pulled out all the old insulation that a lot of air had been moving through that.
Sure.
Just by how black it was on the ends. And I mean, that's a classic sign that you've had air moving through there. And I don't think it was just the air moving up through the soffits into there, but it could have been.
I don't buy it. I think you're right. I think it's warm, moist air coming from the inside. And exterior walls between ceiling drywall and top plates is like a textbook place for you to get a lot of air leakage. And it comes from like around receptacles and light switches and any penetrations in the exterior wall, and then moves through the wall and comes out between the top plate and the ceiling drywall.
Yeah.
I see you want to tape that or foam it, and my guess is that would control his problem.
So I guess he was probably thinking, though, because he didn't see any evidence of ice damming, that wasn't necessarally the case.
Yeah.
But,
and I'm a little bit with him on that, but I mean, we don't know. Does he have like a raised heel truss? I mean, because then that warm, moist air could get tempered a little bit. It may be sort of ameliorating some of that, warmth that's hitting the bottom of the deck. I don't know.
And the fact that he's got the perforated soffit, maybe it's sort of taking the path of least resistance and getting out on before it gets up to heat the roof up.
Yeah.
Patrick, it would be helpful if you could get your cell phone in there and do a little video of what it looks like closer to the soffit area and your overhang, and especially if you can get the camera to look at the top plate to see if it's any air sealing and any gaps. As Matt suggested, check your insulation for dirt, right? It's really obvious when you have air moving through insulation. It's black with dirt.
Yeah, all the stuff that's coming out of your, off of your oven, off of your stove
Everywhere,
when you're cooking. Yeah.
It's disgusting, but it is telltale.
Spider webs, too.
Spider
Spider webs
webs
are a good telltale sign of air movement.
Yeah.
And get your, book of matches and go up there and blow one out and see if you can, determine any air movement there. A blower door is definitely the best way to diagnose this, but
See, there we go. Back to our little our little product we got to make.
You think we need a consumer blower door?
Consumer blower door just for finding air leaks.
He could also get a heat lamp and I'm assuming that it's the north-facing slope of this roof that has this problem. Just get a big heat lamp and shine it on that.
So you think it's a north side because it would have less drying potential? It's not going to get as hot.
I think that's why he doesn't have any issue on the other side. That's my assumption.
I think that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm glad you're on this show.
When I hear mold and mildew, the first thing I think is the north side of a building, But that's the first thing I look for.
Guess who our next listener writes from?
Is it from Newtown, Connecticut?
Newtown, Connecticut, and this is none of us, I swear. This is from Kevin. And for those of you who don't know, Newtown, Connecticut is where our offices are headquartered and where we're talking to you from today.
And every day.
And every,
Well, not every day.
Well, every
Not
day
soon.
except for when we were at IBS.
Yeah.
and the JLC live show.
Yeah. Actually, in fact, JLC live show. This podcast is going to be live. I think a couple of weeks before JLC live, and we'll be there shooting podcasts. If you want to stop by and say hi.
How many are we doing, Rob?
4 in one day.
Man. So we might enlist you to come and sit on the panel if you got nothing better to do, because we'll probably run out of things to talk about.
Yeah, fill some dead air for us.
That's JLC Live in Providence, Rhode Island, because they have multiple shows around the country, right?
Yes, and if we were responsible, we'd know the date to tell people.
Yes, it's
Coming
the
right up.
It's the weekend of the 28th, I think, right? The 30th.
Jeff's looking because he's.
Come on, Jeff, help us out.
We'll get back to that. We'll tell you all when the JLC Live show. In the meantime, we'll read Kevin's email.
Okay.
Hey guys, thanks for having such a great show. Keep up the good work. I'm a younger general contractor in Newtown, Connecticut, doing home remodeling work. I've hired subcontractors for several years now, and I'm starting to do bigger jobs. Here's a point of discussion. For bids and estimates, I break down the bid into different categories such as demolition, carpentry, plumbing, electrical, etc. Each category has its own price with a good amount of detail and then a total price for the job. The older general contractors in my area and almost all of my subs all do one number bids and often without a lot of detail. Which way is better? Older contractors think I'm crazy. I think it's part of the reason people hate contractors. Homeowners like my approach, but am I naive? Any advice is appreciated. My bad if you've already discussed this on a previous episode.
I don't know.
I mean, my guess. Oh.
Should we do that first?
Yeah.
Jeff's flashing us. No.
Flashing us. No,
Put it away, Jeff.
So what date is that, Jeff?
28th through the 30th.
28th through the 30th
Of March.
of March. So
We'll see you there.
Providence,
If
Rhode
you've
Island.
never been, the show is awesome. I would say it is easily the best place for small general contractors and remodelers to learn techniques and about tools and improve their business.
Yeah, and I mean, hit the floor show for some good demos and tools and stuff like that. But then even the conference, the seminars. I mean, that's the first place I saw Joe Stieberg talk, and
they have a lot of good guidance for business people on how to improve your business, because I think that's the biggest problem for most contractors, right?
Yeah, and what we're about to get into here a
Yeah,
little bit.
It is, and it's a good question. So, Kevin, I think you're a good contractor. I know why your elders think you're crazy, though, too.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. If your customers like it, I would say keep doing it. I mean, there's a couple reasons to do it. I mean, one, for yourself, because you want to know how much basically you want to know how much to bid.
Yeah.
Or how much to tell them it's going to cost. But also that also helps you track your costs. And you can say okay, this actually cost more than I thought it was going to. This took longer than I thought it was going to. This took shorter than I thought it was going to. And you can revise your bids later on.
Right. Job costing
forward.
is a key to success as a general contractor.
Yeah.
You want to track jobs, how they're pricing out while you're doing them, and then you want to look back and say, was I right?
Right.
yeah, and I know contractors, builders, tradespeople are all really busy, and it's hard to get their time because they're so busy. But if you don't include that crucial step, it's like you really have no idea how much money you're
So
making.
I'm not convinced that these older general contractors are not doing this work. They're just not giving them to the client. And I
Right.
think that's an important distinction.
Yeah, and I think that's probably what's going on. They're probably worried about getting nickeled and dimed by the client.
If someone's going to say, boy, this electrical estimate seems really high, we're moving 2 outlets. Is that really $500? Well, it might be.
Yeah.
And especially as a remodeling contractor, it's one thing if you're a craftsperson who's making a product that you make repeatedly, you can kind of generalize and probably get a good rule of thumb on things over time. But there's a lot of surprises in most remodeling projects, and so I'm not saying you wouldn't want to do the math for the bidding process, but you might sort of find a happy medium between their opinion of what you should give and what you're doing.
I think you'll find that at least some point in the near future, one of your clients who you've given this comprehensive bid to is going to say, boy, I know a painter, and I know he's going to do that project way cheaper than $2,500 that you have on your estimate. So I'm just going to hire him, and we'll just take that off the bid, right?
Yeah.
And that's not going to work.
Right.
Because it's somebody you don't know, and there might be other costs associated in that painting line item that's like surface protection, disposal of hazardous materials. There are other costs involved in there, and you don't know if this fly-by-night painter is going to do those things.
Right. And there's also risks if you haven't signed a contract yet that they're just going to take your estimate and run to somebody else and say, can you do better?
Exactly.
And they're just going to undercut you, especially if you're including your markups or your overhead or anything like that.
And I hope you are, because you won't stay in business. If you don't.
But I mean, if you're giving them those numbers, then that's definitely a no-no.
Yeah, if you want to stay in business.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like at this early stage in the process, in the bidding process, especially, I mean, if you're doing smaller jobs, maybe it's no big deal. But once you start getting into bigger projects, it takes so much time to do bids on the chance that you might get the job. So it's like maybe play your cards a little closer
to your chest.
For that stage of the process. You know, just try to find a balance between giving them enough information that they have confidence that you know what you're doing, but that you're not giving away all your secrets.
Yeah, it's a delicate balancing act. You want to have trust on both sides of the relationship, but you also need to stay in business to serve your clients. Is something I always remind people. If you're giving an impossibly good deal, you're not doing as good a job as you could for them. That means you're rushing on some stuff. You're perhaps skimping a little on material or whatever, but if you charge enough, you can do the best possible job. And I would say the key to success is that. And get good clients. That's how you get good clients.
Yeah, and you know, it's I imagine a lot of people in small businesses like remodeling contractors don't think about this, but a big part of the process is not just looking at the numbers of what you what you earned on the job, but even actually doing follow up with the customers. It's like try to find a way to sort of get a feel from the customers of what their expectations were and how you met them at the end of the project.
And those are great marketing things too. If you can have testimonials, like especially from customers who have big projects that are happy, that is really your best chance of getting repeat work.
Yeah, and most of your jobs should be coming from referrals. If you're not, then you're probably not doing it right.
I mean, when you're new, you kind of have to take on whatever you possibly can.
Right.
Sure, exactly. But I think the goal of any good craftsperson or tradesperson is to eventually get to the point where you don't even want to advertise. And maybe if you're the kind of trade where you're doing a lot of the same repeat types of work, like, you know, the guy who came and cleared my drain, then you got to advertise because you got to get your name out there. But if you're doing specialized custom projects on a regular basis, eventually I think the goal is to build up enough.
You want people to come to you.
Build a reputation for referrals.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What did the company you worked for, Rob, how detailed were their estimates? Was it a single line item, or did it have dozens or a few?
They were really advanced in trying to make a really good business model, and to the point where we actually had, before House and all that kind of stuff was on, but even before people were like sharing stuff online, they had contracted with this guy who was a software developer to build like a communication system for subs and for homeowners and us online, where we could share documents and drawings
and generate bids.
And so everything was done in a very detailed way.
But what did the
digitally.
client see? Like, what did a bid proposal look like for a client? Did it have a single like sum, or did it have it broken down by category or trade?
I don't remember. It was quite a while ago, so I don't remember the actual details. But I would imagine it, thinking back, that it was probably somewhere in the middle, like what we're suggesting.
It seems like the best way to build trust without giving it away.
Yeah.
What do you think? How would you do it?
I would definitely, at least as an exercise for myself, go through and basically every single penny for every single expense, just so you can track. But I would probably, try to hold as many numbers back as I could.
Break it into general stages or categories, but not specifics.
Right. Yeah. You don't need to give them the price for every single stick of lumber you're buying.
I would not.
No.
They don't need that granularity either. It's just going to be overwhelming.
Right.
Well, especially because, one of the big problems I see in especially artisan trades, but just any trade, is that you're not, as a client, as a customer, you're not just paying for the markup on the materials or the hours of time that person spent on the job. You're paying for their experience, their insight, and it's hard to put a number on that stuff. And that's what you should be really rolling into your markup as you get a better reputation, is that you're getting paid for more than just the hours that you're spending on the job site. And,
Totally.
And it's hard to convince somebody of that, so you're better off keeping those as numbers that are built into the price.
I would say there is one quality of successful contractors that I've observed in all trades, and that's they know their numbers. They know if they're making money on a job. They know what things are going to cost, and that is only comes from like messing up, and right. It's just from experience, and it's.
And a lot of people get into a business because they like to do the work and they're not necessarily wanting to be a business person. But if you're going to be in business, you got to be a business person.
And if you're like defaulting on your loans and not paying your suppliers, you really cannot do a good job for your clients.
Yeah.
That's when you get the contractors that are like one guy in a truck who's good at what he does, but he doesn't know how to charge for things, and he's constantly taking on new jobs because he has to keep money flowing in, but he's not actually making any profits.
Yeah. I mean, it's not good for anybody. What do you say, Jeff? Have you had contracted work, and do you get a single line item, or do you have like a series of prices that add up to a final number?
When I've done jobs, that's what I've done.
Yeah.
Is just a final number.
I mean, let's hear from the people out in the audience here. It's like email us at fhpodcast.
Tell us your estimating and job costing secrets, please.
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously we don't expect you to divulge all your secrets, but it's like we're out of the three of us here, we've worked for companies that have been profitable companies, but we've not necessarily been deep involved in this process ourselves. So
I hate it all. So maybe that's why I'm an editor and not a carpenter anymore.
Yeah, sometimes that's why it's good, even as a small business person, to hire out. Yeah. I mean, certainly bookkeeping, but I know so many of these part-time bookkeepers that work for tradespeople, work for architects, and they make their living by having, half a dozen clients that they rotate through. So they're essentially part of the team, but they're just not there full time, because it's sometimes as a small business owner, it's hard for you to justify the cost. But if you're not doing it right yourself, you got to farm it out.
I would tell you to focus on what you're good at. If you're good at being on the job site, do that. If you're good at the bookkeeping and the business running, do that. And if you're not good at the other thing, have someone else do it.
Yeah.
Your job will be a lot more fun that way too.
And your clients will like it better.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank everyone for listening. Thanks to Matt, Rob, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your questions at fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us wherever you're listening. It helps other folks to find us. Happy building, and thanks for listening.